Turkey and the European Union. Talks about accession have been around for decades. Are both parties even serious about joining? Is the chasm widening? Has this been a project that once started is impossible to finish given the passage of time, attitudes, reality, and above all, history? So, what are the prospects of a grand union between Europe and Asia? So join me, Jan Darasz, for how we got here.
Since the creation of the European Steel and Coal Community in 1952 by 6 founding members, France, Italy, West Germany, the Netherlands, Belgium and Luxembourg, the bloc has undergone major changes. As decades passed, the body saw 7 enlargements through which 21 new member states were accepted into its ranks and gradually evolved into what is now known as the European Union. Interestingly, however, despite successfully joining NATO in 1952, one nation did not manage to end up as a formal member of the EU, Turkey. Turkey's accession process has been a political challenge for the EU for more than a decade. Experts point to the evolution of the Turkish political model and approach to international conflicts as major reasons. Yet, with geopolitical realities shifting, both sides seem keen on developing bilateral cooperation, with issues such as the migration crisis, the war in Ukraine and the conflict in Gaza too major not to coordinate decisions. A quick and seamless accession for Turkey is unlikely, however. The European Commission's reports regarding Ankara's progress towards joining the EU are openly critical. Apart from rule of law and human rights concerns, the bloc points to the Turkish economy as a source of significant problems. The EU believes that Ankara's interference in the domestic economy has been largely responsible for the crippling financial crisis in Turkey. An even bigger discrepancy of ideals is visible in Turkey's diplomatic efforts. Its refusal to join the sanctions regime targeting Russia, its decades-long blockade of the Republic of Cyprus's cooperation with NATO, or its failure to implement the readmission of refugees from Greece in 2016 are all seen by the EU as evidence of Turkey's unpredictability. Nonetheless, a rapprochement of sorts can be expected to develop, perhaps in the form of a liberalization of visa laws or border customs, as neither side will benefit from the continuing of tensions. Both Ankara and Brussels know that cooperation and a united front are crucial now more than ever.
Joining us today is Adam Michalski, the Department for Turkey, Caucasus and Central Asia, the Centre for Eastern Studies here in Warsaw. Welcome to the programme.
Pleasure to be here.
Great to have you. When we talk about the accession of Turkey with the European Union, historically it seems to me it's like inviting the Ottoman Empire to join the Habsburg Empire, an incongruous project.
Well, there has been for, I'd say, the last decade, a growing kind of rupture between Turkey and the European Union due to a series of political disputes that have really kind of aggravated these relations. I mean, if we go back 10 years, Turkey was very much in line with a lot of Europe's foreign policy. Everybody was looking towards President Erdogan, back then Prime Minister, as doing a lot of good political reforms, combating the authoritarianism of the previous Kemalist regime. And that was seen as something very beneficial for the European Union, kind of signaling that Turkey really was trying its best at that time to meet the kind of, Copenhagen criteria of accession, and trying to realistically actually show some effort into making these joining efforts actually happen. And I think it was since 2005 that the Turkish and EU negotiations, accession negotiations actually opened up, and that really kind of lasted, I'd say, for a couple of years. But the problem is that as much as Erdogan was reforming his country under kind of this pretext that it was all about the European Union, at the same time he was consolidating his power. And not a lot of people, well, there was a growing amount of people who became skeptical of what Erdogan was doing, not only in the European Union, but also internally in Turkey. And this internal element became very visible during the Gezi Park protests, if I'm correct, that was 2011 or 13, if I'm not wrong, where Erdogan essentially crushed them by force. Those protests were essentially protests against Erdogan's way of a kind of hard-fisted way of ruling, of governing cities and dictating what he wanted to see in Turkey happen, which some people were not fond of the way he was practicing politics. And then later on, of course, we had the coup in 2016, which Erdogan, of course, violently repressed not only the coup, the people responsible for the coup, but also, dozens, if not hundreds of people that were not connected necessarily, but were seen as political enemies. And then, of course, we have a constitutional referendum, which shifts even more power to the president. And all of that package, from Europe's perspective, was a signal that Turkey was no longer interested in actually joining the European Union, that Erdogan has shifted so far away that he was off to his own project that was perhaps using the accession talks as just a way to kind of have some form of a political dialogue happening with Turkey. But there was no real political will underpinning Turkey's idea of joining the European Union. That has already kind of shifted away, in part because if the European Union wanted Erdogan to continue on reforming his country, he would essentially have to roll back all the power gains that he has, succeeded over the last couple of years. And that wasn't, of course, something that Erdogan wanted to do.
So if we go back further, in the 1960s, I think, was the first talks about Turkey's accession. Was it an attitude in Europe that Turkey was, in effect, a European power, or in Turkey that Europe was an Asian-friendly power? I mean, what was the spirit of the age?
I would actually shift it perhaps even to the 1950s, when we have Turkey joining NATO, along with Greece. And the context for that was the Cold War. The West needed to have Turkey on its own side, in part because of its strategic location, its proximity to the Caucasus, which at that time was, of course, the USSR, but also the fact that, it was strategically controlling the Bosphorus Straits. And so having Turkey on NATO's side and also on Europe's side would, first of all, guarantee Western influence in Turkey. At the same time, it would prevent this idea that perhaps some other country could steal Turkey and move it on its side, like the USSR. That was, of course, highly unimaginable at that time, because for Turkey, the USSR was an enemy. I mean, it was only shortly after the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, which was partly due not only to imperial Western powers, but also to imperial Russian dominance in the Balkans that have shrunken the Ottoman Empire. So Turkey was also fearing Russia. And as a result, it was not only militarily trying to bring itself closer to the West, but also economically. And that's where the discussion with the coal and steel, community and the other members really kind of started to take shape. Turkey saw a huge benefit in linking its market, its domestic market, with the European states. And there was this growing sense that at the same time, Turkey was becoming a far more Western country. And it did create this idea that perhaps Turkey isn't, in the minds of a lot of bureaucrats in Europe, that perhaps Turkey, just like Greece, is very much a European nation, and that perhaps, we can make as much use of Turkey as we have done with other members when it comes to, building a political, economic bloc. And so this was definitely a thing.
And what are the main points of friction now between Turkey and the EU? You mentioned Greece, two rivals in the Eastern Mediterranean, historic rivals. Yeah. What are the other points? Is it economics, such as trade, the visa question, the customs, or is it a more an attitudinal problem?
Well, I think it's many things on various levels. I mean, if we're talking about Turkey's neighbors, as you mentioned, Greece is a long-standing problem for Turkey in the way that the maritime borders are not agreed. This causes a lot of friction. As a result, Turkey and Greece are constantly kind of bringing the situation to the brink of war sometimes when it comes to these incidents where one country crosses the borders of another, Turkey picks up their jets, and this has a highly escalatory kind of nature to it. And of course, Turkey blames Greece then later on for using the European Union to kind of block any discussions with Turkey, conditioning that until Turkey does not revise its expansionist policy in the Mediterranean, they do not even want the European Union to have anything to do with Turkey. And so as a result, that aggravates Turkey, saying that Greece is essentially using the European Union and its voting rights in the parliament to block any form of accession. And something very similar is happening with the Republic of Cyprus. But that's kind of like one thing aside. The other thing is the European Commission reports, which every year when they come out routinely once a year, and they look at Turkey's accession membership and the progress that has been made. Well, these reports for the last 5 years have been very critical of what Ankara has been doing. And so every single time these reports are published, Ankara says that, of course, the European Union is completely, uses its power to kind of enforce its own view on Turkey, of how it should behave, of how it should, conduct its relations with other countries. And it's kind of this judge of what Turkey is. And Turkey, absolutely, Ankara does not accept this form of a relationship. It considers it to be a very unproportional. And at the same time, there's a growing kind of feel in Ankara that, Turkey is far more than something to be kicked around, that Turkey wants to have a say and be treated as an equal, not as a junior partner to this relationship.
Yes, you mentioned last time we spoke about the Ottoman heritage, very proud empire, and you don't kick empires around in vain.
So there is a growing sense that President Erdogan has created out of Turkey, at least at a minimum, a regional power. And Turks will not at this stage kind of sit like ducks and accept whatever is being told to them. I mean, this has been a radical change in how Turkey, I think, really postulates its demands and how it is unwilling also to have these demands being told to it. So they want to be treated equally. But I mean, building on this topic also of what kind of really irritates Turkey is, at the same time, Ankara does still see a lot of benefit in having close ties with Europe, particularly economic ones. You've mentioned Turkey wants visa liberalization for particularly a lot of its workers which go to Europe to work. Germany is the big kind of player over here. But that requires Turkey to change its terrorism laws as part of course, the visa regime, which would undermine Turkey's wide definition of this terminology that Ankara needs in order to combat its opponents, particularly the PKK, but also the Gülen movement, which is the movement that Ankara says organized the coup in 2016. And so this wide definition of terrorism is something that Turkey wants to keep in force. But on the other hand, the European Union is saying that if you continue on using such a definition, then the visa discussions, we cannot progress them. The other thing is, for example, the customs union. Turkey has a customs union signed already since the 90s with the European Union. The problem with it is that it kind of hinders Turkey's trade with third-party states, which are not in the European Union. There's a small kind of paragraph that says that Turkey cannot sign its own trade deals with partners that the European Union has a free trade agreement, because there's technical and legal rules which would suggest that perhaps Turkey then can use these third partners to send goods which it cannot send because its customs union does not allow. So there are frictions. The European Union isn't that willing to give away this huge asset, because this is perhaps today the biggest thing that Turkey wants, especially with its problems and economic problems. It really wants this thing, but giving away such a lucrative customs union, updating the current customs union into something much bigger would essentially give away all the cards that Europe has that it can play to kind of mobilize Turkey to be a little bit more on its side. So there isn't much willingness to expand this customs union, and that creates also friction in Turkey, saying that once again you're politicizing everything that you can, and this is why everything in our relations, from the accession talks to our international relations. Everything is stalling and everything is moving in opposite directions rather than closer together.
Do you see a continuation of this policy with the future Turkish president? Erdogan is now on his last term of office. Is it going to be another one of these ritual, like you said earlier, ritual talks that are useful to have the two huge regions talking, or do you see any sign of change?
Well, I see a slight sign of change, perhaps on the European side, less on the Turkish side, where Europe does realize that the relations currently with Turkey are not moving these discussions, talks, dialogue anywhere other than just conflict. Yeah. And that in the current geopolitical scenario, when we have a war happening in Russia, Turkey's providing help to Ukraine, the Caucasus has been completely reshaped in terms of its balance of power. Russia has been kicked in, and Turkey has a lot to say. Those are all areas where the European Union has a lot of interests and would like to have Turkey, again, cooperate more with the European Union. So I see that over the last couple of months, and this was particularly Josep Borrell's initiatives in the European Commission, to perhaps launch a new way of dialogue, a new idea of dealing with Turkey by perhaps increasing dialogue, by perhaps looking into the visa liberalization once again, the customs union, upgrading the customs union as a way to incentivize Turkey to kind of return to the table and have some constructive dialogue. The problem is that, first of all, I don't see this being an easy task for the European Union to kind of pass through, in part because the European Council has to accept a lot of these ideas, and as I've said, Greece won't be that much willing to do that. Cyprus won't be that much willing to do that. France won't be that much willing to deal with Erdogan, especially that they have also their own interests in the Caucasus. So that's going to be a problem. And as for the Turkish side, well, I think the Turkish side at this stage, they have developed a very autonomous foreign policy in a way that, well, if Europe does make a positive move towards Ankara, Ankara will surely use that. And I think that we can definitely see Turkey having much more closer relationship. But because of my skepticism when it comes to, in part, of the European Union, and partly to the fact that Erdogan has his own foreign policy and he's not going to be he's not going to be willing to backtrack or to kind of step down on his priorities just to have Brussels satisfied. So as a result, I feel that these relations might be, in the long run, still moving in different directions. Sure. But I think that because of the fact of, Turkey's economy being bound to Europe, and some way, of course, bound with NATO, we're always going to have Turkey a lot more on the European Western side than perhaps, on Russia's or China's side.
Well, I'm sure we'll follow your skepticism as events developed. So thank you very much, Adam Michalski. We have to end our discussion, but thank you very much for coming on our programme.
Thank you.
That's all we have time for today. Join us again on How We Got Here.